Russia today, in broad daylight, attacked the Kyiv region with ballistic missiles right after a night of massive attacks by Ukrainian drones and missiles on Russian factories and Wildberries warehouses. Today, July 24, the Russians struck a training ground in the Kyiv region where an arms exhibition was taking place at that moment. Unfortunately, there are casualties, injuries, and destruction. According to the media, it was a drone exhibition called Armada. According to the latest information, it is already known that 10 people were killed and 100 were injured as a result of the strike on the training ground in the Kyiv region. And here is the detail that will make us take a hard look at this topic today. The announcement about this exhibition at the training ground was publicly available on the internet. That means the Russians could have found out about the event from open sources and timed the strike precisely for a specific event.
Do you see this?
It's blazing at Wildberries.
In the second part of this episode, we will discuss Ukraine's strikes on Russia last night. In particular, a Flamingo missile hit a factory in Kirov that produces anti-aircraft missiles for the Russian army 1,000 kilometers from the border. Also today, Wildberries warehouses are burning in St. Petersburg, Tver, and occupied Simferopol. And Western analysts are already insisting that the war has finally struck. Specifically, it has hit wealthy Russians. And this has drastically changed their perception of the war. At the same time, Russia has closed the Black Sea today. And Russians are trying to flee the country en masse amid rumors of mobilization. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss all these topics together. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are moving towards the milestone of 300,000 subscribers, so I would be grateful for your support, your subscription. So I'll start this episode with the strike on the training ground in the Kyiv region because this is the main and most painful news of the day. On July 24th, during the day, the Russian Federation Army launched a missile strike on the Kyiv region. This was officially reported by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. He noted that a rescue operation is underway at the site of the strike. Subsequently, the Kyiv Regional Military Administration clarified that the Bucha district suffered the most from the strike. According to preliminary information, the strike was carried out on the territory of a private training ground where events were taking place. At around 11:30 in the morning, a series of explosions occurred in Kyiv. The Ukrainian Air Force reported the movement of several high-speed targets toward the capital and the region. Earlier, they had warned about a ballistic threat from the north. Later, information began to spread on social media claiming that the strike allegedly targeted a military technology exhibition near Kyiv. This was reported to journalists by Valery Borovic, the founder of the defense products manufacturing company First Contact. According to him, it was specifically a drone exhibition. At the moment, it is known that 10 people have died and about 100 have been injured. And now the reason why there is a heated debate on social media. The announcement about holding a weapons exhibition at the training ground. The announcement was publicly available on the internet. It was blatantly advertised. So Russian intelligence didn't need to gather anything at all. It was enough to simply monitor open sources with a keyword search. Just type in arms exhibition, drones, and so on. And contextual advertising will eventually give you information that such an exhibition will be held in the Kyiv region. And that's exactly why Borovic says that the strike was most likely carried out timed for a specific event. Not indiscriminately, not at random, not just at the training ground, but with precise knowledge that at that very moment, drone manufacturers, representatives of flight schools, and of course the military would be gathered there. And no matter how much former advisors of the former Minister of Defense talk about the Russians conducting aerial reconnaissance, space-based reconnaissance, satellite imagery, and so on and so forth. The point is, it's dangerous to hold events like this openly, but for some reason they still keep doing it. I won't mention any names, but if you check social media right now, you'll see just a few names of former advisors to the former Minister of Defense who insist that, unfortunately, the Russians managed to find out where things were happening through reconnaissance. Let me emphasize again, all of this was publicly available. And here I'll remind you that back in August 2023, Russian forces struck the center of Chernihiv, and Chernihiv as well. At that time, one of the missiles hit the local drama theater where a drone exhibition called Lyuty Ptashki was taking place. At that time, 7 were killed and over 150 injured. The organizer of that exhibition was the Victory Drones project, whose founder is Maria Berlinska, who has been involved with drones for a long time. And back then, she was loudly criticized for holding such events openly, and now, 3 years later, the same kind of event is being held openly again. The conclusion from this story is simple. Any public announcement of an event where weapons manufacturers and the military gather is basically an open invitation for a Russian attack. The enemy reads our websites, Telegram channels, communities, and so on very thoroughly, sometimes even more carefully than we do ourselves. As for the overall picture of the strikes in Russia over the past day, a boarding house in Chernihiv region was hit. In Kherson, a 68-year-old man was injured, and in Odessa region, a woman with a child was hurt. Our air defense shot down 164 aerial targets overnight and in the morning.
Do you see this? This is just a disaster. I was asleep last night. I didn't hear anything. I usually sleep deeply. When I woke up in the morning, I saw this. I'm still shaking. I think this is the warehouse in Altari located in St. Petersburg. To be continued.
Well, Wildberries is on fire.
I'm heading out onto the toll road.
It's burning hard, right at the biggest warehouse in St. Petersburg.
The air defense was shooting them down.
The air defense was working, that's it. Well, 7 of them. They flew past all the warehouses and hit Wildberries directly.
To be continued. Here's the white one. To be continued. To be continued, to be continued, to be continued.
Continuation.
Thank you for being with me, thank you.
That night, all of Russia was burning. On the morning of July 24, Ukrainian Defense Forces struck a defense facility in the city of Kirov. The full name of the target is Vyatskoy Machine Building Enterprise Avitek Joint Stock Company. It is part of the Almazante concern, which is the core of Russia's air defense industry. Let's break down exactly what this plant does, because understanding this determines how painful the strike actually was. And you know what they hit it with? A Flamingo missile, which according to the Russians, Ukraine doesn't have. Excuse the brief digression, but I have a YouTube episode about the Flamingo missile that periodically becomes relevant again. And so, from time to time, I see comments there where, this has been happening for about a year. Russians come and write, no, this missile doesn't exist. It's all made up. There's nothing. They're just showing you cartoons, and so on. Well, today, here's that cartoon. The cartoon hit a factory in Kirov. So what's important there? First, this Avitek factory is involved in the production of Tor anti-aircraft missile systems. This is a short-range military air defense system, the kind that Russians use to protect their troops and facilities from our drones and missiles. In other words, we are knocking out the production of their air defense systems. Secondly, and this is even more important, the enterprise supplies components for the engines of Kh-101 and Kh-59 missiles. And both missiles are strategic cruise missiles that the Russians regularly use to strike our cities during massive attacks. So the plant is directly involved in producing what is hitting Ukrainian homes. Third, in addition to this, the enterprise specializes in air-to-air missiles, target missiles, ejection seats, and aviation systems. What they use to strike this plant is a source of particular pride. The co-founder of the Ukrainian company Firepoint, Denis Shtileman, published a video of the missile launch today. And the company confirmed that the plant in Russia was hit by an FP-5 Flamingo cruise missile Ukrainian-made. The distance is more than 1,000 kilometers from the border with Ukraine in a straight line, which means it's our own missile, our own production, 1,000 kilometers deep. If you ask me, that's a pretty impressive result. According to the Russian side, the consequences are as follows. Kirov governor Alexander Sokolov first confirmed the very fact of the attack on what he called an enterprise in Kirov and the presence of wounded, but at first did not provide any details. Later, the numbers increased. It turned out that 6 people died on the spot and another 26 were injured. According to him, the fire has been extinguished. Electricity and water supply in the city have been restored because after the attack they were disrupted. According to eyewitnesses, the blast wave shattered windows in buildings 300 meters from the impact site, so it's obvious how powerful the strike was. And here's a detail that says a lot about how things are organized among them, the savage Russians. So, people are reporting on social media that there were no warnings about the attack, the air raid sirens didn't work, and apparently no evacuation of employees was carried out at all. So the factory kept operating as usual right up until the moment it was hit by a missile. So the Almazanti factory, which itself produces air defense systems, ended up without any warning, without an air raid siren, and no air defense protected it. Well, that's quite an interesting irony. And Zelensky commented on the strike with the following words, quote, "Today, our Ukrainian defense forces struck one of the most important military enterprises in Russian Kirov. It supplies components for aviation and missile technology, which in particular are used in massive strikes against our cities and communities." And then he called it a just response to Russian strikes on Ukraine and added that long-range sanctions hit an oil facility almost 1,350 kilometers away. That means they struck not only the missile plant in Kirov. And while Kirov was burning, our drones, not missiles, but drones, were hitting logistics targets. And this time the reach extended to northern Russia, including their second capital. In particular, in St. Petersburg, FP-1 drones attacked a logistics complex. The Wildberries logistics complex is one of the largest goods processing and distribution centers of the company in the entire northwest of Russia. And after several hits, a major fire broke out there. I want to emphasize there were several hits, no air defense protected it at all, and no one even really tried to fight off this attack anymore.
To be continued. Subtitles by Dima Torzok. Subtitles created by Dima Torzok. Here it comes.
Here it is, here it is, here it is, here it is, here it is.
Fuck.
Have you noticed how routine it has become that Ukrainian drones and drone missiles just freely fly all over Russia? 1,300 kilometers, 500 kilometers, it doesn't even matter how far. They fly freely, attack warehouses, attack oil refineries, attack basically everything, and the air defense, the much praised Russian air defense, can't do anything about it at all. I remember at the beginning they used to shoot some of them down, but now it's all become routine. And so the governor of Leningrad Oblast, Alexander Drozdenko, of course, reported after 3 in the morning that they supposedly shot down 33 drones over the region. Well, the classic wording like they shot everything down, even though at the same time there were reports on social media about large-scale strikes all over the region. Let's move on. Tver. The head of the region, Vitaly Korolev, reported a fire at the administrative building of a logistics center in the settlement of Elevator after the attack. Local residents recorded the fire, but authorities didn't detail the incident's scale, though it's clear warehouses are also burning. And the most telling one. The armed forces of Ukraine are now taking out the trash from Ukrainian Crimea, which was brought there by those unwashed wild Russians. In Simferopol, a fire also broke out at the Wildberries warehouse at night after a drone strike. In general, the destruction of Wildberries warehouses is in full swing. And now, here's the most interesting part, how this works. Not in a military sense, but in a social and psychological sense. These attacks are specifically targeting Wildberries warehouses. Today, I opened the Wall Street Journal and saw an article there. The publication dedicated it to the strikes on Wildberries. There's a separate analysis, and the conclusion is very unfavorable for the Kremlin. The main thesis of the publication is as follows. For 4 years, the Kremlin carefully shielded Russians from the consequences of the war, maintaining the appearance of normal life for wealthy city dwellers, while the poor were simply sent to die in Ukraine. The picture looked like this. Stores were open, deliveries arrived, and the war was somewhere far away on TV. But now, Ukrainian drones are striking the logistics centers of the country's largest e-commerce company, bringing the war into the homes of the Russian middle class. And as the publication writes, 81 million people use Wildberries services every month. That's more than half of Russia's population. The Wall Street Journal notes that discontent had been building even before the warehouse attacks due to fuel shortages caused by Ukraine's months-long campaign of strikes on oil refineries. And then the publication cites an assessment from Oxford Economics from an analytical note this week, verbatim. The fuel crisis is perhaps the most noticeable shock for ordinary citizens since the mobilization of new troops in September 2022. At the same time, as the publication emphasizes, Vladimir Putin shows absolutely no inclination to reduce his military ambitions in response to the worsening economy. So, people are worse off, but he continues, and by the way, this actually shows the reality of Russia best of all. Russians could be literally starving and Putin wouldn't care about it at all because he has the war, Rome, Donbass, and everything else. And a logical continuation of this whole story, 2 pieces of news about how Russians are reacting to all of this. The first piece of news. Today, Russia officially declared its waters in the Black Sea dangerous for navigation. Russians barely had time to rejoice that ships are no longer entering the ports of Odessa when it turned out that ships are not coming to them either. Bloomberg writes that the warning is addressed to all ships located in Russia's exclusive economic zone in the Black Sea, and the Russian Ministry of Defense explains this by the threat of attacks from Ukrainian drones and naval drones. So just think about the scale of this change. The country that has been trying to strangle Ukrainian ports for 4 years is now admitting that its own waters have become unsafe. In other words, our naval and aerial drones have made the Black Sea a problem for the Russians. The second piece of news, the Russians, for some reason, are fleeing from Russia. The number of online searches about how to get a passport and where to go abroad without a visa has quickly reached record levels since the start of the full-scale war. The reason is clear. On July 22, the State Duma of the Russian Federation passed a law in one day that makes those convicted of banditry and drug smuggling eligible to be sent to the front. The Russian National Guard is preparing to expand its powers specifically for the period of mobilization and martial law. And Ukrainian intelligence puts the figure for the fall draft at no less than 500,000 people. and I released a separate episode on this topic yesterday. There I break down the logic of why Russians really need to be afraid and flee Russia. Because all the factors really indicate that Putin will announce mobilization in the fall. What format it will take is a separate question. Visit the channel and watch the previous episode on this topic if you haven't already. But it's getting harder and harder to run away. As it turned out, officially, over 3 million Russians have already been placed under travel restrictions in the past year, and men are simply being denied the issuance of passports. Bottom line. Today is, of course, a difficult day. On one hand, there is our pain. This is the ballistic missile strike on the training ground in the Kyiv region, where the Armada exhibition was taking place. There are 10 dead and dozens wounded there. That's what is known at the time of recording this episode. And a bitter lesson about public announcements that the enemy reads instead of intelligence data. On the other hand, the Ukrainian Flamingo operation 1,000 kilometers deep against the Almaz-Ante plant, which makes air defense systems for them and components for missiles that are launched at our cities. Plus four burning Wildberries warehouses at once, from St. Petersburg to Simferopol, and most importantly, the effect. The war has reached Russia's middle class. The fuel crisis has become the most keenly felt shock for ordinary Russians since the mobilization of 2022. People are searching en masse for ways to leave Russia. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is declaring its own waters in the Black Sea dangerous. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would be grateful. You can do this by making any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.